Ooh, Counter-Strike. Half-Life had come out, and I loved Half-Life. It was amazing, and then everybody started talking about this mod, Counter-Strike, and it was really early. It was like beta 2 or something, and I downloaded that beta and played it, and I was like, this is so amazing. Having sort of objectives instead of just deathmatching. I got super excited about it, and I was already working. That's what I was doing in the industry, was texture artist anyway, and so I contacted Cliff and Min and was like, I want to help. So like I made textures for DE Dust, a Cobble, Oil Rig. I don't know if you remember like the Escort, the VIP scenarios. That was in the older one anyway.
How I met Chris. I met Chris at Westwood Studios, Westwood Pacific. And then we ended up working sort of together for a little while anyways on Red Alert 2 Yuri's Revenge.
Met Phil, Mike Booth, a bunch of other guys. And then Valve purchased Counter-Strike. So then they got in touch with me for that because they had to buy all the content. They started looking at the texture work and stuff, and then they offered me a job. So when I left Westwood, I actually went up to go work at Valve. Like if there was one studio that I would have wanted to work at, take my pick out of the whole industry, that's where I wanted to go.
I was actually kind of bummed because we were doing co-art direction on Yuri's Revenge, and it was a big job. It was kind of an unruly team, and so I felt like he was abandoning me.
Well, they were already well into work on Half-Life 2, and I didn't want to ruin anything. Like I still wanted to play it.
So you didn't have the story spoiled for you at all when you were up there?
Mm-mm. And I was doing other cool stuff at Valve, so I was working on Counter-Strike and then some early TF2 stuff.
Westwood Pacific ended up sort of being, they changed the name to EA Pacific. You know, so it kind of went from like the Westwood culture to the EA culture. The last project I did there was Command & Conquer Generals. That was just a tough project. And by the time that product shipped, I was like, okay, I'm done with this place.
Mike Booth left, Phil left, almost everybody that I hung out with left at that point in time. And so I was talking to Mike, and Mike was he was kind of off doing his own thing, and he was doing this indie stuff. And I started talking to him about, not specifics of what Valve was doing, but I was like, look, they're gonna have a way for you to sell this. You have to go talk to Valve. And I don't know the details of how that relationship or what those conversations were like, but at the end of the day, he kind of came out of that working with Valve, making the Counter-Strike bot.
I reconnected with Mike. Fortunately, the timing was just right. You know, he had this project from Valve, you know, hey, you know, they want us to finish Counter-Strike Condition Zero. Why don't you come over and join me and help out?
I was in Southern California for 6 years, I think, so a lot of sort of good friends in SoCal, and up in Seattle, like I didn't know anybody.
Chris left because he didn't like Seattle weather. I mean, you know, huge car guy. Seattle's probably the worst place for a car enthusiast.
Yeah, the rain. I was changing a thermostat in my Mustang Cobra. I was lying in a parking lot, and it was freezing and raining outside, and my back was all wet from lying in the parking lot. I was like, this has got to go. I'm done. I lasted 1 year, and as much as I liked working at Valve, I had to come back to the Sun.
And that was, you know, sort of the beginning of like the core team at Turtle Rock. Chris and I were doing the art, a couple programmers, Mike was doing the AI. He actually lived in Turtle Rock. It's like a little neighborhood in Irvine. He was just like, hey, Turtle Rock Studios. So it's just, you know, it's stuck. It works. Yeah.
Okay, you lead the way.
We worked on Counter-Strike Condition Zero. We finished that up and shipped it. And then after that, you know, Valve thought we did a pretty good job. So they said, hey, why don't you work on Counter-Strike Source as well? We became the sort of custodians of Counter-Strike.
For me, I've always been around Counter-Strike the whole time, my whole career. So Counter-Strike's good for me to work on. But I think in general, if you're working on something that sort of you didn't create, you can be excited about it, you can be passionate about it, but I think there's always that drive where you want to work on your own thing. And Valve was actually really supportive of that idea too. They were like, heck yeah, you guys should figure out what you want to do.
We tried some, like a first person kind of wizard combat game. It had a lot of fun elements, but you know, it was a little geeky in that it's like, it was kind of complicated. And so we messed with that for a while, but that just didn't end up going anywhere. We had played so much Counter-Strike, right? It would get heated, you know, because we're all fighting each other, right? And, you know, everyone was getting pissed at each other. Like, you headshotted me with the Desert Eagle, like, for the 100th time. I'm gonna kill you. I remember at one point, like, Chris and I were just sitting there talking, like, why can't we play a game where we can all be friends and like each other after the game? I want to play with 3 of my buddies, you know, where we're all working towards the same goal and just win as a team and feel good. And, you know, the hard sort of high five, you know, yeah, kind of thing. When we looked around, we said, why isn't anyone giving us this? You know, well, hell, if no one's going to give it to us, let's make it.
People on the internet, they were playing Counter-Strike against bots with knives.
You could set up your match so that the bots had certain weapons, whatever you wanted, right? And so people were just giving them knives. And then, you know, 2 or 3 of your buddies would try to hold out against this like continual onslaught of zombie terrorists.
Wow, they're kind of creepy, they're kind of mindless, they're kind of like zombies. We had the Counter-Strike code, right? So I took like CS Italy and made it all dark and creepy and foggy. And Phil took the terrorist skins and painted them over and made them all rotted and disgusting and kind of zombie-ish. And we were playing that, and that was really fun, and that sort of bumped it up a notch. And so then we started bugging Mike. Could you tweak it so that we could have like 32 players? And then we played again, like, wow, that's even more fun. It wasn't even a project. It's just like no different than us playing a game after work. You know what I mean? It was like Minecrafting or something. It was just, we weren't even, that's the weird thing, we weren't even thinking of it as a product or even really a potential of a product.
After the sort of the Wizard combat game really didn't go anywhere, we're kind of like, well, crap, what are we going to do? At the time, the game was called Terror. And Chris and I were like, we should do Terror. We should kind of work that out. Some of the guys weren't like super keen on the idea of zombies. A lot of people, I think, thought zombies were cheesy.
Fortunately, 28 Days Later, it had just come out on DVD, and I brought it into work, and so we all ate pizza, and we watched 28 Days Later.
And at that point, I think a lot of light bulbs turned on. You know, like, oh, okay, we could do it this way, right? It doesn't have to be cheesy undead. It can be this crazy infection that makes people insane and violent.
And then it seemed like, okay, we could do this. And so we ditched all the Counter-Strike stuff. Initially, I built a bunch of buildings and streets. You'd drop off in the city and you'd go to this building and then you'd plant this zombie bait, which was basically the bomb in Counter-Strike, right? And it would attract all the zombies in the area and you had to kill them. So the whole thing was sort of you were exterminators. That stuff turned into No Mercy.
You know, I mean, like everything we do, we had a prototype up and running within like a couple months, and then we just played the crap out of it.
We got rid of the zombie bait and stuff and was more about evacuating and surviving, but it was 4-player co-op.
We'd been working with Valve for so long that it was really easy for us to just show them stuff. They'd be like, here, check this out. We found out, you know, once we gave them the game, a lot of the guys were playing it on their own, and they were sort of developing all these strategies and stuff.
You'd hear like people at Valve like screaming. So there's all this emotional reaction over what was a terrible looking game.
Keep in mind, at this point, this is, you know, the environment is all just big gray boxes. It's not pretty at all. The infected are still like the sort of cheesy terrorist zombies. And
I mean, it was already fun. So then it was just like, well, now we just got to make it look good.
It's funny because, you know, we're working on this and Gabe was like, we should really, you know, we heard Gabe had said, we should just release this now. You know, he just wanted to like throw it out there. And we're like, wait, no, let us, you know, finish it and, you know, make it like look cool and stuff. I mean, I think that was pretty high praise.
Was he serious about that? He really wanted to release it? Just as
yeah, you never know with Gabe. I think so, but.
What's it like working with Gabe?
He's a smart dude. I think a lot of people are kind of intimidated by him because he's very quiet. And when he does talk, he throws out some really sort of poignant and intelligent, you know, and sometimes it takes you off guard. You think this guy's just sort of sitting over there and you kind of forget that he's there. And the next thing you know, he asks you this question that's just like, and a lot of times you don't even know how to answer.
They said, well, why don't we just fund it? Basically, they were like acting publisher. But largely, they let us sort of build the game that we wanted to make, which was super cool. So yeah, we worked on it for 3 years under that sort of setup. And then 2008, they bought Turtle Rock Studios, so suddenly we were Valve South. Left 4 Dead wound up being kind of a phenomenon.
I mean, I designed the boomer, you know, so of course I've got one like out of the box to you. I don't know if you've seen these, but his mouth opens. We managed to, you know, make our mark on the industry with it. We wouldn't be proud of that, you know.
Not like Call of Duty sales numbers or anything, but just sort of in, like it was on the best co-op game of all time in Game Informer, which we have framed over there. So I think it had a lot of sort of a big impact on a lot of people. A lot of people played it and loved that we did something different.
Do you think it influenced the industry in a lot of ways?
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I would like to think that yes, it did, right? Because there was not a huge move for co-op that I remember before we released Left 4 Dead.
I'm trying to remember, did Call of Duty Zombies exist before Left 4 Dead?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty direct.
Yeah. You know, maybe it was a happy accident, or, you know, maybe it was a coincidence, but we gave players a cooperative experience that, as far as I know, never existed.
The 2 studios was a challenge. Everybody who worked at Turtle Rock Studios loved working at Turtle Rock Studios. And then sort of being Valve South, we lost something. It wasn't really about like personal relationships, it's just lack of communication and that sort of thing between 2 studios that are 800 miles apart. Left 4 Dead, we finished it and got it done. As soon as it was in the can, we knew that we were gonna have that conversation. Like, what do we do?
We wouldn't be here without Gabe. He sort of gave us a chance, you know, initially, you know, and at the same time, you know, once we sort of split back out after the Valve purchase, it was his suggestion that we'd sort of go back and, you know, become an independent studio again and continue working, you know, the way we had been working before the purchase. That was freaking awesome. You know, I mean, you don't get an opportunity like that very often.
Did Turtle Rock have to like buy itself back from Valve then? Or how does
No.
that work financially?
No. We were already a separate studio, right? Valve retains Left 4 Dead, the IP, and they signed us back our logo and name.
Where you said you had to leave the IP for Left 4 Dead behind though?
Well, yeah, you know, sure. But, you know, I mean, that's games.
Mike's decided he was done for a while running his own studio. He really, I think at the time, he was really enjoying not being the boss. And working with Valve, I think, was really good for him to take a break from that stuff. So he said, I don't want to run Turtle Rock 2.0. So Phil and I sort of stepped up to plate.
The thing you got to keep in mind is Chris and I come from a development background. We're not businessmen. We've only ever like risen to maybe middle management.
It's a tough thing, right, running a studio, and that's why I didn't want to do it. Actually, I declined initially. For me, it was like, okay, the only way Turtle Rock's going to exist is if I step up and do this. It was a lot going on, like kind of stressful, kind of scary.
Did Mike give you some lessons then when you were setting off on your own?
No. Very quickly, we had to find a new office space, and so it was just immediately out of the frying pan of like shipping a game into the fire of like, holy crap, we have to start a studio.
All right, you ready? I'm doing it.
You're gonna get it in the gut, dude.
All right, you ready?
Oh God,
3,
Phil!
2, 1.
Turtle Rock had never gotten very big. I think the biggest we ever got was 13, and I think there were 7 or 8 that were sort of left after all the dust had settled. And so we moved into this tiny little warehouse because it was super cheap. It's like $3,000 a month.
We actually spent about the entire month of December that year in the warehouse, like painting, putting furniture together, you know, doing like basically taking this really, it was pretty sketchy looking, you know, and making like a cool spot, right? And at the end we had this like really inexpensive, really kind of cool spot to be in. And that's where we stayed for the next 2 years while we worked on all the Left 4 Dead DLC.
So Valve, you know, they kept to their word, and we started working on some Counter-Strike stuff.
Was it what became Counter-Strike Go?
Portions. We did our 2 years of contract work with Valve, and then we're like, okay, we got to do something again. We survived for 2 years, kind of as our own studio. It's time to take the next step.
Chris and I sort of sat down. We're like, look, if we're going to do something big again, you know, like Left 4 Dead, we got to do it now before people forget who we were and what we did. I mean, we've got like at least 5, you know, other games, either in various stages of written up or just in our heads that we'd really love to make.
Okay, we did Left 4 Dead. Now what would we want to do? Where would we go? Where's the next step? And that's what Evolve is. The idea's been around forever, before Left 4 Dead. It was kind of the big game hunter thing.
Wouldn't it be cool to hunt, you know, a lion, right? Something that if you miss it, it's going to come and attack you, right? Well, what if it was an elephant? Well, screw that. What if it was a dinosaur? Or screw that. What if it was a giant alien monster, right?
Was it dinosaurs at a certain point?
No, it was never dinosaurs. But I mean, you know, you do it in a sci-fi setting, the sky's the limit, right? Any kind of goofy thing you can come up with, you know, that works for gameplay, you can explain it away by just saying, oh, it's, you know, it's science. I think Chris maybe approached it from a different sort of inspirational angle than I did, you know, where he was looking at it from like a boss battle perspective.
It was always a versus game. It was always against another player.
Hey, these boss battles, in these games you have these big exciting moments where you're fighting this boss, right? And it's like, well, that could be a whole game, really. You know, you mean you take that and you expand on it. And, you know, you'll see these games that come out and they're like this sort of big, expansive experience, but there's one little nugget in there that you're like, wow, I really wish that they'd have expanded, you know, on this.
Deep in the jungle, where nothing that lives is safe.
You lose it here, you're in a world of hurt.
I mean, we envisioned it like Predator, like the guys in the jungle hunting down this big monster. And you needed all the foliage and the forest to be lush. And the problem we ran into that was quickly apparent was the tech. I was working on the Source engine at the time, and you just couldn't build very large outdoor environments. It just wasn't the engine for it. And then later on comes Crysis stuff, or Far Cry. I remember Far Cry being really impressive outside and thinking like, this could do it. Like if there's one thing CryEngine does really, really, really well, it's like lush outdoor environments. Phil and I, as part of running the studio, we knew that we didn't know very much, especially about how to run a business. We were gonna have to pitch this game to publishers. We'd never done that before. You know, everything's been a dialogue with Valve, and that's way different than talking to a publisher. So.
Why wouldn't you pitch the game to Valve?
Well, we talked to them about it, you know, but that's not the business that they're in. And now they're just like crazy with Steam and their own stuff. So like they don't have any interest in funding a game.
The great thing about having an agent is they know this stuff, right? We said to our guy, we're like, what are the chances that they're actually going to pick this game up? You know, because we were really excited. We wanted to make this game.
And he was like, oh, negligible. The reality is that you're going to pitch the game and then they're going to say, that's cool. That sounds pretty cool, but we have this other thing that we need somebody to work on and we think it's similar and we think you could do the job.
But that didn't happen. THQ really liked the idea. I mean, they were like really gung-ho for it.
Those guys really fell in love with the game. Danny Bilson loved the game from the initial pitch.
Yeah, Danny was like a huge supporter of ours. You know, I mean, I got nothing bad to say about the guy. I mean, that kind of enthusiasm, it's hard to say, hey, let's go somebody else when you've got this organization over here that is like super jazzed about your idea. You know, I mean, they fought hard because we had a couple publishers that were interested. They gave us a really awesome deal because they really wanted the game.
Was Jason Rubin just as excited about it?
Yeah, Jason, you know, once, you know, he came in, he was super supportive again. I mean, at that point, THQ's kind of in trouble. And he even said to us, he's like, look, you guys probably aren't going to hear from me very much because I got a lot of other problems, right? And you guys are doing great. So, you know, just keep doing what you're doing. And, you know, he brought it he actually, you know, led us down a few roads that, you know, resulted in some really good game design decisions, you know.
What
Like,
kind of stuff?
Well, like initially, we only had 4 hunters. Jason's a really big proponent of the free-to-play kind of stuff. You know, he suggested, well, what if you guys, just in case, because we have no idea what the market's going to look like in a year, why don't you guys work up a plan that would allow this game to be free-to-play? And so we did. I had been looking at like games like League of Legends, you know, which, you know, obviously does really well selling characters, and like that makes sense, right? I mean, I would much rather buy a character than like an individual piece of equipment. And that's sort of where the multiple characters came from.
Is there still a chance it'll take free to play?
No. Okay. I mean, that's sort of, you know, one of those things where it's like, hey, try this. And we're like, okay, we'll try that. It becomes something else. Yeah. You know, that actually ended up being really good for the game, no matter how we decide to sell it. Even when we signed on with THQ, we knew that they were having some difficulties. I think their situation gave them a bit of desperation that allowed them to sort of say, well, screw it, let's try it. You know what I mean? And I think that's cool. I mean, fear is a powerful motivator, right? And sometimes people will do crazy things when they're afraid. And sometimes those crazy things turn out to be really brilliant things.
Talking about the risk, like we were going to have to use an engine we had never used. Mike Booth wasn't running the studio anymore, so Valve wasn't involved. We were going to have to go from 10 people to we're 74 today.
It was scary. Keeping a company alive so that 10 people can pay their bills is kind of scary enough. You know, you add 40 more to that, and that becomes even more scary, right? I mean, you don't want to f*** around. sometimes I feel like I'm riding like this out of control, like wild horse, you know, like just like holding on to the reins for dear life, you know, like, oh God, I hope this thing doesn't pitch me and toss me in a ditch somewhere, you know.
Just growing a team from 10 to 74, a lot of publishers would say, no way. That's way too much risk. Hats off to THQ for stepping to the plate and going for it.
But, you know, it got down to the point where, you know, they just weren't going to be able to pull it out.
The thing that we kept telling everybody is, look, the game speaks for itself. All of those risks that all the publishers were scared of in the beginning, none of it matters now because we have the game, right? We have the game, you can play it, anybody can play it. There's no way that this thing's ending here because THQ runs out of money. Somebody else is gonna pick it up. The game will see the light of day. It's too good to not. Actually, I mean, the team's chomping at the bit just to get the word out, right? Everybody wants everybody to know what we're doing. The fact that there was Evolve in the fine print of the bankruptcy stuff, everyone's like, yeah, like, now somebody knows the name of what we're working on,
So we had to go through this whole, you know, the whole auction process where basically all of THQ's assets are auctioned off to the highest bidder.
We've been working with THQ. It's been a really good relationship. They've let us do our thing. We've got this awesome game, and now our game's up for sale, and whoever bids the most wins and takes it. And we don't have any control.
Pretty much every publisher that was interested got to come and see the game. You know, they would show up for a day and they would sort of rifle through our underwear drawer, which is kind of what it felt like. You know, we had this big secret project, and now we're just like showing all these people.
Every publisher knows what Evolve is, and probably they've played it.
It started to feel kind of discouraging in a way, you know, because we didn't really feel like we had like a whole lot of control over our destiny at that point. It's like, well, gee, whoever's the highest bidder, that's who we're going to have to work with. And, you know, a lot of people came through. Some of these guys we really liked, some of them we didn't like so much, you know. I was talking to Jason Rubin about it, and, you know, he's like, how are you guys feeling about this? And I'm like, oh, you know, it kind of sucks, you know, we feel like we're completely out of control. And he's like, well, what's to stop you guys from bidding? And we were kind of like, eh?
We put a bid on our own game as a sort of like a fail-safe. It was a very small amount of money, and it was what we had in the bank, basically in the savings account, which was like 250 grand. That's what we had.
You know, some people asked us, were you guys like bummed that 2K outbid you for your own game? We're like, no.
Actually, us getting the game was worst case scenario because we were spending all the money we had in savings on buying the game, and we still got to pay people, and we would still have to sign the game with somebody else to get funding for the month after and the month after. So we did pitch the game hard, right? We wanted anybody who saw the game to want it.
And you knew there's just no chance you would retain that IP?
Yeah, no.
The game that is, you know, that we have today is at its core the same game that we were playing 4 months in when we made a prototype. I mean, it looks a lot different, and, you know, there's stuff around it that is different, but, you know, it's largely the same. I mean, yeah, they've been good partners. They're filming me.
I know.
I feel very awkward.
I know. We shouldn't look at the camera. That would make it obvious.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah, look, text, words.
You missed it. You need to capitalize that.
I'll capitalize everything.
Yeah.
I'll capitalize
Yeah. All
everything,
caps.
Again, I'll go back to why I chose to be a business owner and run Turtle Rock Studios is because I just wanted a place where I could come into work Monday morning and feel good about it.
Everyone always asks us, why didn't you have a turtle? It's like, well, would you rather have a turtle or a dragon? Here, buddy. Oh, yeah. This is Gobi. He's just sort of our pet.
As long as we can continue to sort of work in this fashion where people are excited to come to work and we're working on something that's cool and we're kind of doing our own thing.
So does that imply that you always want to be independent then?
I think so. There's a lot of things that I would have said that I would have never done, right, to begin with. I didn't want to run a business, and here I am.
We didn't get into this to be executives. We got into this to make games. So. Right now, we want to finish this game, get it out, you know, and we hope everyone loves it, and sort of we can prove to the world that, you know, hey, you know, Turtle Rock is for real, right? There has always been some question as to whether, you know, well, how much of Left 4 Dead did you guys do? And, you know, how much of this was Valve, and, you know, how much of this was Mike? You know, all these these elements that are no longer part of the picture. In essence, we're starting over from ground zero, right? We have to prove ourselves again. So far, I feel pretty good about, what we've done. I mean, you've played the game, it's pretty damn fun. Everyone that plays it comes away with a smile on their face.
So next gen, right?
Do you think you're ever going to want to work on something like Left 4 Dead again? Would you ever pitch Valve on picking up that franchise or contract work with Valve in the future or anything like that?
Yeah, I would, for sure. Then that's maybe just a personal thing. It'd have to be a decision with a lot of people, but for sure I'd work on Left 4 Dead tomorrow. There's a lot of stuff that we didn't get to do.
We got a lot of ideas. We want to make a lot of different things. A lot of people will start a business because they want to build it and then sell it and cash out, right? I mean, that was never really in our plan. It's still not. I think for us, as long as everybody in the studio is living a good life, comfortable, financially, and making awesome games, I'm cool with that for the indefinite future.
Hopefully 3 years from now, we're still making Evolve even cooler and coming up with new crazy things that can happen in the game. So we'll see.